In a quiet small town in America, where the streets are calm after sunset and the neon signs of diners glow against the night, there lived a man named John Miller. He wasn't a man people would instantly notice, no fancy suits, no polished shoes, no social status that made him stand out. But those who knew him, even just a little, always said the same thing: John works harder than anyone I've ever met. John was a father. A widower. A man who had seen too many nights turn into mornings without a single hour of proper rest. By the time most people in town were still sipping their first cup of coffee, John had already finished one job and was on his way to the next. At dawn, he was the short-order cook at Mel's Diner, flipping eggs and bacon for the early risers, his hands moving faster than the jukebox music playing in the corner. Customers knew him as the man who always said, "Good morning, sir. Hope today's a better day," even though his own eyes carried the weight of exhaustion. By afternoon, he was a delivery driver, pushing through traffic in an old pickup truck that rattled at every red light. He carried packages, groceries, even fast food orders, anything that would bring in a few extra dollars. His daughter Emily used to joke, "Dad, you're practically Santa Claus without the sleigh." He would laugh, but the truth was, every mile, every delivery, was part of a bigger purpose. And when the town fell asleep, when porch lights dimmed and living rooms went silent, John put on his third uniform, a navy blue shirt with "cleaning staff" stitched on the pocket. He became the night janitor at Jefferson Middle School. Long after the students had left, he swept floors, emptied trash bins, and scrubbed hallways until his knees ached. Sometimes, as he polished the school trophies in the glass case, he imagined one day seeing his daughter's name engraved on one of them. 3 jobs. 7 days a week. 16 to 18 hours a day. And yet, for John, none of it felt like a choice. It was a promise. Years ago, when his wife lay in the hospital bed, fighting an illness that eventually took her life, John had held her hand and whispered, "I'll take care of Emily. I'll give her the future you dreamed for her. I promise." Those words had carved themselves into his soul. That promise became his fuel, his burden, his silent prayer. One night, just past midnight, John walked into his small 2-bedroom home. The floor creaked as he placed his boots by the door. He tried not to make a sound, but the exhaustion in his body made every movement heavy. He carried with him the smell of grease, cleaning chemicals, and dust. The house was simple: walls with fading paint, a second-hand couch, a kitchen with a fridge that hummed louder than it should. But for John, the heart of the house wasn't the furniture. It was his daughter. He walked quietly to Emily's room. The door was slightly open, the glow of a desk lamp spilling into the hallway. She had fallen asleep at her desk again, surrounded by textbooks, college brochures, and scribbled notes. A pencil rested loosely in her hand. The edges of scholarship applications peeked from underneath her elbow. John stood there for a moment, staring. He saw the determination on her young face, even in her sleep. Her hair falling across her cheek, her breathing slow and steady, as if the weight of the world hadn't yet found her shoulders. He wanted it that way. He wanted to carry all of it, so she wouldn't have to. He stepped inside, gently lifting the blanket from her bed and draping it over her shoulders. He whispered softly, though she couldn't hear, "Keep dreaming, Emily. Don't worry about the rest. Daddy's got it." And then he did something he often did when she wasn't awake: he looked around her room. The old posters, the stack of borrowed library books, the second-hand laptop that froze every other hour. He noticed the "college-bound" sticker she had taped to her dresser. A bittersweet smile spread across his face. She had dreams bigger than this town. And he was determined, no matter the cost, to get her there. But outside that room, reality waited. On the kitchen counter sat a stack of unopened envelopes, utility bills, medical debts, rent notices. John glanced at them and sighed. He already knew what they said. The red stamps, the deadlines, the late fees. Still, he gathered them into a neat pile and slid them into a drawer. Emily didn't need to see this. Not now. Not ever, if he could help it. From the window, he could see across the street. The neighbors had just bought a new SUV, their driveway shining under the streetlight. Their kids wore the latest clothes, their parents attended every school event. John didn't envy them, but sometimes the contrast stung. His daughter deserved all of that too. Instead, what Emily had was a father who worked 3 jobs in a home where laughter was often replaced by the sound of silence and tired footsteps. And yet, even in that silence, there was love. A love so deep that it showed up not in fancy vacations or expensive gifts, but in the worn-out boots by the door, in the calloused hands that tucked her in the man who would rather break himself than break his promise. That night, as John finally lay on the couch for a few hours of sleep, his body ached as if it were made of stone. His mind wandered to a thought he had every night: will all this be enough? Will she understand someday why I wasn't always there? He closed his eyes, whispering the same prayer he always did: Lord, give me strength. Just enough to get her there. Just enough to see her make it. The town slept peacefully. But in one small house, a father's love burned quietly, fiercely, through every hour of exhaustion, every sacrifice unseen. And this was only the beginning of their story. Mornings in small-town America often begin with the sound of birds, the aroma of coffee drifting from kitchens, and the sight of children heading off to school. But for John Miller, mornings began long before dawn. By 4:30 a.m., he was already on his feet, tying the laces of boots that had more miles on them than most people's cars. His daughter, Emily, slept soundly as he quietly closed the door behind him, stepping into the cold morning air. At Mel's diner, the regulars greeted him with a nod. Truck drivers, factory workers, early commuters, they all knew John as the man behind the sizzling griddle. With every plate he served, he carried a smile, even if his eyes were heavy. He remembered names, remembered orders, and sometimes slipped an extra pancake onto a plate for a struggling single mom who came in with her kids. But no matter how many eggs he cracked, how many orders he filled, John never ate there himself. The free coffee from the waitress was usually enough to get him through. Meals were an afterthought when every dollar mattered. By noon, when most people took a break for lunch, John was racing across town in his dented pickup truck. Delivery work wasn't glamorous. Sometimes it was groceries, sometimes furniture, sometimes bags of fast food. The jobs were unpredictable, but the cash tips kept gas in his truck and the lights on at home. There were days he drove so long his back felt fused to the seat. When traffic stalled, he would rest his head on the steering wheel, closing his eyes for a moment. Horns blaring behind him often pulled him back. Still, he pressed on, telling himself, one more delivery, one more bill covered. And when the world wound down, when families gathered for dinner and television, John was just beginning his 3rd shift. The hallways of Jefferson Middle School echoed with silence as he pushed a mop bucket from classroom to classroom. Posters about kindness and respect decorated the walls. Children's artwork hung proudly in the hallways. He would pause sometimes, looking at the honor roll board, whispering under his breath, "Someday, Emily's name will be up there. Someday." By the time the last floor was polished and the garbage was taken out, it was past midnight. His feet dragged. His shoulders slumped. But he never complained. He couldn't afford to. Sacrifice had become his second skin. He wore the same work boots for years, patching them with tape when the soles wore out. He turned down invitations from co-workers who went out for Friday drinks. He sold his wedding ring long ago to cover hospital expenses. His watch, scratched but still ticking, was the only valuable he kept, because it had been a gift from his late wife. The people around him noticed in different ways. Some admired him. The owner of Mel's Diner once told a new waitress, "That man is the definition of grit. Don't ever complain about a long shift until you've seen him work." But not everyone was kind. At Emily's school events, whispers floated. Parents in polished shoes and pressed dresses would murmur things like, "That's Emily's dad. He's never around, is he? Always working." They didn't see the man who gave up his own meals so his daughter could have hers. They didn't know about the nights he walked home in freezing cold just to save gas money. Emily saw more than she let on. She saw his hands, rough, calloused, cracked in the winter. She saw the way he sometimes winced when bending down, the exhaustion he tried to mask with a tired smile. At night, when she finished her homework, she would place a plate of leftovers in the fridge, writing a sticky note, "For Dad." Most mornings, she woke up to find the plate untouched. He always insisted he'd already eaten at work. But she knew better. One Saturday, Emily begged her father to buy new sneakers. Her old pair had holes near the toes. John smiled and said, "Sure, sweetheart. We'll see what we can do." That week, he skipped lunch for 3 days straight. He stuffed his pockets with crackers from the diner. When payday came, instead of putting the money toward his overdue phone bill, he drove Emily to a local outlet store. Emily's face lit up as she tried on the sneakers she had been eyeing for weeks. She didn't see the way John's hand shook slightly when he handed over his debit card, hoping it wouldn't decline. She didn't notice how relieved he looked when the receipt printed. To her, it was just new shoes. To him, it was proof that he could still give her small pieces of a normal teenage life. The contrast between their world and others became clear every time they walked into school events. At Emily's science fair, one of the wealthier dads boasted about funding his son's private tutor. Another family arrived in a new SUV, their daughter's project displayed on a glossy trifold with expensive equipment. Emily's project was built from recycled cardboard, duct tape, and a library book she had borrowed. But her father stood behind her, clapping the loudest, saying, "I swear, honey, you could outsmart all these kids with just a pencil and paper." It wasn't arrogance. It was his way of protecting her from a world that measured worth in dollars. Still, late at night, when the house was quiet, John sometimes felt the weight of guilt. Sitting on the couch with his head in his hands, he whispered, "I'm trying, Linda. I'm trying so hard. But is it enough for her?" He thought of his late wife often. She had been the one with laughter, the one who brought music into their home. Now, the house echoed with silence, broken only by the sound of Emily's pen scribbling late into the night. Sacrifice had stripped John of many things, health, comfort, social life, but it had also given him something stronger. A resilience that people in town couldn't quite name. A quiet determination that Emily absorbed every day, even if she didn't always say it out loud. And as the seasons changed, as the years of sacrifice piled up, father and daughter carried a bond that words couldn't describe. A bond built not on riches, but on the unshakable foundation of love. Music swells softly, transition tone shifts toward Emily's perspective, and while John tried to hide the toll of his sacrifices, Emily's eyes were always watching, always noticing. For most teenagers, high school years are filled with laughter, sports games, proms, and carefree afternoons at the mall. But for Emily Miller, those years carried a different weight. She loved her father deeply. She admired him more than anyone else. But as she grew older, she began to notice the pieces of life her friends seemed to have that she did not. At football games, she watched as bleachers filled with cheering parents holding signs, waving pom-poms, and snapping pictures. Her own father's spot often sat empty. She told her friends, "Dad's working tonight," forcing a smile that felt heavier each time she said it. She never blamed him, not really. But a quiet ache grew in her heart. At home, Emily saw what most outsiders never did. She saw the fatigue on her father's face when he came home past midnight, his eyes red, his shoulders slumped. She noticed how he always washed his uniforms by hand, scrubbing away grease and chemical stains late at night when the washing machine was already filled with her school clothes. She saw the cracks in his work boots, the way he rotated the same 3 shirts for years. She noticed that when groceries ran low, her father always insisted, "I'm not hungry, sweetheart, you go ahead." She pretended to believe him, but deep down, she knew the truth: he was skipping meals so she wouldn't have to. Sometimes, when she sat at the kitchen table late at night, finishing an essay, she would hear the quiet coughs from the couch where he tried to sleep. They sounded deeper, harsher, as if his body was begging for rest he never allowed it. She would glance at him, blanket barely covering his shoulders, and whisper in her heart, "Please hang on, Dad. Just hang on." High school life didn't make it any easier. At lunch, her friends often shared stories of family road trips, birthday parties with parents, or weekend shopping sprees. Emily listened politely, nodding along, but inside she felt a pang of envy she hated to admit. One afternoon, her best friend Rachel said, "Hey, Em, my mom's driving us to the mall this Saturday. Wanna come? We're picking out dresses for prom." Emily hesitated. She wanted to go. She wanted to feel normal. But she also knew her dad couldn't spare money for dresses, not with bills piling up. So she smiled and said, "Maybe next time." When Rachel left, Emily walked home, clutching her backpack tighter, tears burning in her eyes. But there were moments of pride too. Whenever she got an A on a test, she would tape it on the fridge, waiting for her father to notice. And even if he came home exhausted, his eyes half shut, he always smiled and said the same words, "That's my girl. Smarter than anyone I know." It was those little affirmations that kept her going. At night, when the house was quiet, Emily began a habit that no one knew about. She started writing letters. Letters she never sent, never shared. Letters to her father. Sometimes they were filled with gratitude. "Dad, I see what you're doing. I see every sacrifice. I promise, one day I'll make it worth it." Other times, they carried the sting of frustration. "Why can't you just be at my games? Why can't you rest, just once, and be there like other dads?" And often, they were a mix of both, love and longing tangled together. She folded those letters neatly and kept them in a shoebox under her bed. It became her secret ritual, her way of processing feelings she couldn't say out loud. The prom season arrived, one of the biggest cultural moments in any American high schooler's life. For weeks, the halls buzzed with excitement about dresses, tuxedos, limousines, and after-parties. Emily smiled along, but her heart was heavy. She knew her father couldn't afford the luxury of a prom dress or the cost of tickets. So when friends asked if she was going, she laughed it off, saying, "Prom's overrated anyway." But late at night, she sat at her desk, scrolling through pictures of dresses online, tears slipping down her cheeks. Despite the struggles, Emily carried herself with quiet determination. She threw herself into academics, applying for scholarships, staying late at the library. She often told herself, "If Dad can work 3 jobs, the least I can do is work hard at school." Her teachers noticed. One counselor pulled her aside one day and said, "Emily, you've got potential. Don't waste it. I know things aren't easy at home, but you can go far." Those words became another flame of motivation in her heart. Yet, no matter how hard she worked, the distance between her and her father sometimes hurt more than she could admit. On her 17th birthday, he came home late again, carrying a small cupcake from the diner. The candle was bent, the frosting smudged. He set it in front of her and said, "Sorry it's not much, kiddo. Happy birthday." Emily forced a smile, hugged him tight, and said, "It's perfect, Dad." But later, when he fell asleep, she stared at the half-eaten cupcake and whispered, "I don't want perfect gifts. I just want you." She didn't know then that he often whispered something similar at night when he thought she was asleep, "I don't want to miss her life. I just don't know how else to keep us afloat." And so, their lives moved in parallel, John sacrificing silently, Emily observing silently. 2 hearts bound by love, yet separated by unspoken words. Emily kept writing her letters. Each one held the weight of her emotions: gratitude, frustration, pride, longing. She didn't know if she would ever share them, but writing gave her strength. What she didn't realize yet was that one of those letters, written on a night when the ache felt too strong to hold inside, would one day become the letter that broke her father's heart in the most beautiful way. Music swells, narration softens, transition prepared for conflict ahead. Because even when love is strong, silence can be heavier than words. And Emily's silence, her hidden observations, were slowly building toward the moment neither she nor her father would ever forget. There comes a point in every life where the weight of sacrifice collides with the limits of the body. For John Miller, that moment arrived quietly, without warning, on an ordinary Tuesday night. It was late. The fluorescent lights of Jefferson Middle School hummed overhead as John pushed his mop across the cafeteria floor. His back ached, his hands trembled from fatigue, but he kept going. The bills at home didn't care how tired he was. They demanded payment, and he was the only one who could provide it. He bent down to pick up a crushed soda can, but as he stood, the room spun. His knees buckled, his vision blurred, and for a moment, the mop slipped from his hands. He caught himself against the wall, gasping for air, sweat dripping down his face even though the air was cold. For a terrifying second, he thought he might collapse completely. But then, just as quickly, he steadied himself, forcing a deep breath. He whispered to no one in particular, "Not now. Not here. Keep going." He picked up the mop again, pushing through the pain. The next morning, Emily noticed something was wrong. When he walked through the door, his face was pale, his shoulders slumped. She asked gently, "Dad, are you okay?" John brushed it off with the same answer he always gave, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a long night." But Emily wasn't convinced. She noticed the way he rubbed his chest, the way he sat down slower than usual. For a moment, she wanted to push harder, to beg him to see a doctor. But she knew what he would say, "We can't afford it." So she stayed silent, carrying her worry like a stone in her chest. That night, as John lay on the couch, sleep eluded him. His body screamed for rest, but his mind drifted back in time. A hospital room. White walls. The faint beeping of machines. His wife, Linda, lying weak but smiling at him. She had taken his hand, her voice soft but steady. "Promise me, John, promise me you'll take care of Emily. Don't let her dreams die with me." Tears had blurred his vision as he whispered back, "I promise." Those words had become his lifeline, and his prison. Every day since, he had lived with the weight of that vow. Emily, too, was carrying her own quiet ache. One evening, as she folded laundry, she spoke softly, "Dad, you don't always have to work this hard. You don't have to do everything." John looked at her, his tired eyes softening. He smiled faintly. "Honey, I'll rest when you've made it. When I know you're standing strong, chasing your dreams, living the life your mother wanted for you, that's when I'll rest." Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him she didn't need perfection, that his presence meant more than his paychecks. But the words caught in her chest. Instead, she just nodded, tears she didn't want him to see pooling in her eyes. The gap between them widened, not because of love, but because of silence. Emily stayed late at the library, studying for SATs, while John picked up extra shifts. Sometimes they went days barely speaking more than a few words, their conversations reduced to sticky notes on the fridge, dinner in the fridge. "Don't forget your math test today. Proud of you." It wasn't anger that separated them, it was exhaustion, sacrifice, and unspoken fears. One Sunday afternoon, Emily decided to break the silence. She found her father asleep in his truck outside their house. His head rested against the steering wheel, his breath shallow. She tapped on the window, and he jolted awake, embarrassed. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling, "You can't keep doing this. You're going to kill yourself." John shook his head, forcing a weak smile. "Don't worry about me, Em. I'll be fine." Her frustration boiled over. "No, you're not fine. You're never fine. You're always tired, always hurting, and you won't let me help. I don't care about fancy colleges or money, I just want my dad." The words hung heavy in the air. For a moment, John looked away, his jaw clenched. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, as though it was the only thing holding him together. Finally, in a low voice, he said, "Emily, you don't understand. If I stop, everything falls apart. This isn't about me. It's about you." Tears streamed down Emily's cheeks. She wanted to scream, to beg, to tell him that his love mattered more than any paycheck. But instead, she turned and walked inside, slamming the door behind her. John sat alone in the truck, his chest aching, not just from fatigue, but from the fear that he was losing the very person he was sacrificing everything for. That night, in her room, Emily cried silently. She pulled out her shoebox of letters and wrote another one, her hands trembling as she scribbled across the page, "Dad, I love you. But I can't keep watching you destroy yourself for me. Please, please believe me when I say, you're already enough. More than enough." She folded the letter and tucked it away, not knowing that one day, it would change everything. In the darkness of the living room, John sat with his head in his hands. His body was failing, his spirit stretched thin, but one thought pulsed in his mind like a heartbeat: "I can't stop. Not yet. I promised her mother." And so, even as the cracks deepened, even as father and daughter drifted further apart in their silence, the cycle continued. But something inside both of them was reaching its breaking point. After months of exhaustion, conflict, and silence, something began to shift. It was spring in their small town. The trees bloomed along Main Street, graduation banners started appearing on school fences, and for the first time in a long while, Emily Miller felt a glimpse of hope. She had poured herself into academics, late nights at the library, endless hours of practice essays, and every ounce of determination she had inherited from her father. And then, one afternoon, the letter arrived. Emily sat at the kitchen table when she opened the envelope. Her hands shook as she unfolded the paper. Her father walked in from work, still in his diner apron, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's that, sweetheart?" he asked casually, not expecting much. Emily's eyes widened, a smile spreading across her face. "Dad. I got in. State University accepted me." John froze. For a moment, the exhaustion melted away, replaced by pure joy. He rushed over, pulled her into his arms, and laughed with a pride that came from the deepest part of his soul. "That's my girl. You did it." For a rare moment, the heaviness lifted. They laughed, cried, and held on to each other. But soon, reality came knocking. Tuition. Housing. Books. Meal plans. The numbers on the acceptance letter seemed larger than life. That night, after Emily went to bed, John sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a pile of bills. He scribbled on scraps of paper, adding, subtracting, trying to make the math work. But no matter how he rearranged the numbers, the answer was always the same: they didn't have enough. John rubbed his temples, whispering under his breath, "Just one more job. Just one more shift. I'll find a way." Meanwhile, at school, Emily overheard classmates talking excitedly about expensive colleges. "My parents are flying me out to tour NYU," one girl bragged. "We're looking at Stanford for pre-law," another boy chimed in. Emily sat quietly, forcing a smile. Inside, she felt the sting of comparison. While her friends dreamed of faraway universities, she was torn between chasing her dreams and protecting her father from more sacrifice. And then came a small miracle. Emily was called into the guidance counselor's office. The counselor smiled warmly, handing her a letter. "Congratulations, Emily. You've been awarded a partial scholarship. It doesn't cover everything, but it's a start." Her eyes filled with tears. She ran home and handed the letter to her father. John read it slowly, his hands trembling. And then he did something unusual. He walked straight to the small bookshelf in the living room, took down an old frame, and carefully placed the scholarship letter inside. He hung it on the wall. To him, it wasn't just a letter, it was proof that his sacrifices were building something real, something lasting. That night, John allowed himself a rare moment of celebration. He cooked Emily's favorite meal, macaroni and cheese from scratch, with breadcrumbs on top. They sat at the table together, laughing, telling stories. Emily said softly, "Dad, maybe things are starting to turn around. Maybe it won't always be this hard." John looked at her, his tired eyes filled with pride. "It's always been hard, sweetheart. But you make it worth it. Every second." Still, in the quiet of the night, John wrestled with fear. He had already been turned down by 2 banks for student loan co-signing. His credit was too weak, his debts too heavy. He hid those rejection letters in the same drawer where he kept unpaid bills. Emily couldn't know, not yet. So he picked up extra shifts again. Driving later into the night, scrubbing floors until his hands blistered. He told himself, if I can just get her through the first year, maybe she'll get more scholarships. Maybe. The contrast around them grew sharper. One weekend, Emily was invited to a graduation party at a wealthy classmate's house. She arrived in her old hand-me-down dress, her shoes scuffed but polished. Parents in expensive clothes mingled on the lawn, sipping champagne. Kids boasted about exotic vacations planned for summer. Emily smiled politely, but inside, she felt out of place. She thought of her father, still at work, probably eating crackers in his truck between deliveries. On the drive home, she whispered to herself, "Someday, Dad. Someday I'll give you more than this." But even amidst the struggle, small sparks of hope kept them going. The framed scholarship letter on the wall became their beacon. Every time Emily walked past it, she felt her father's pride radiating from it. Every time John looked at it, he felt the strength to keep going just a little longer. One evening, as Emily studied at the kitchen table, she glanced at her father sitting across from her, repairing his work boots with glue. For the first time, she saw not just his exhaustion, but his resilience. She said quietly, "Dad, do you ever regret it? Working this hard, giving up so much?" John paused, looked at her, and shook his head firmly. "Never. Because every sacrifice I've made has led me here, to this moment, with you. And someday, when you walk across that stage, I'll know it was worth every second." Emily swallowed hard, blinking back tears. She didn't say anything, but inside she made a silent vow, "One day, I'll make sure you see that all your sacrifices weren't in vain." Music swells slightly, hopeful tone building. The horizon was still filled with challenges, but for the first time, the Millers could see a flicker of light breaking through the darkness. A scholarship letter. A framed reminder of progress. A father's relentless will. A daughter's growing determination. Hope had finally entered their story. The weeks after the scholarship letter brought a strange mixture of excitement and tension into the Miller household. Emily was thrilled to be moving toward her dream of higher education, but beneath the surface, her father carried the weight of looming bills, unpaid balances, and the mounting reality that even with help, college costs would be crushing. At night, when Emily was asleep, John often sat in the dim light of the living room, staring at the framed scholarship letter on the wall. It gave him pride, yes, but it also reminded him of how far they still had to go. He whispered to himself, "One piece of paper doesn't pay for textbooks, housing, and meals. She deserves more than scraps." At work, his exhaustion began to show. At the diner, his manager pulled him aside. John, you're working yourself into the ground. Customers notice when you forget orders. Take a break. But John only shook his head. Can't afford a break, Mike. Not right now. In the evenings, when he worked as a night janitor, the echo of empty school hallways pressed on him. He would stop sometimes, leaning against his mop, staring at college posters plastered along the bulletin boards. Smiling young faces, bold slogans like, "Your future starts here." He would mutter under his breath, "For some, maybe. For kids who don't have to worry about money." Then, pushing the mop forward again, he'd remind himself, "But Emily will. I'll make sure of it." Emily, meanwhile, was balancing her own internal conflict. While her classmates posted celebratory photos online with new college sweatshirts, she carefully avoided the subject in casual conversations. She knew her father was sacrificing too much, yet she didn't know how to stop him. One Saturday morning, she gathered the courage to bring it up. "Dad, maybe I should just go to community college for now. It's cheaper. I don't want you working yourself to death for me." John's face darkened. He slammed his coffee mug down harder than he meant to. "No. Emily, you worked too hard for this. You earned your place. You're not going to throw it away because of money." Tears welled in her eyes. "But Dad, I don't want you to," he cut her off. "I've been working 3 jobs for years. What's one more? What's a few more shifts? If it means you get a better life, then it's worth it." The words hung in the air like heavy stones. Emily knew she couldn't argue with his stubborn pride, but inside, she wondered if her dream was turning into his burden. As graduation approached, the gap between dreams and reality widened further. The acceptance letters, the scholarship, the excitement, it was all overshadowed by financial strain. When Emily picked up her cap and gown, she saw other parents arriving in polished cars, chatting easily about upcoming dorm shopping trips. Her father, in his grease-stained delivery uniform, stood quietly at her side, trying to hide the embarrassment of not fitting in. At night, Emily overheard phone calls. Her father speaking in low tones, asking about loans, trying to negotiate payments. The repeated answer always seemed to be, "denied." She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she should give up her dream entirely. At school, the contrast grew sharper. One classmate complained about having only a mid-range dorm room. Another joked about their parents arguing over which brand-new laptop to buy. Emily forced a smile, but inside, she thought of her father's cracked phone screen and his old work boots patched with glue. The emotional strain took its toll. John grew quieter at home. Sometimes Emily would find him staring blankly into space, his food untouched. When she asked if he was okay, he brushed it off with a forced smile. "Just tired, sweetheart. Just tired." But the truth was, he was slipping under the weight. His health suffered, chronic back pain, frequent headaches, the constant fatigue of someone who never truly rested. Yet he refused to stop. The final straw came one evening when Emily came home to find him asleep at the kitchen table, still in his work uniform, head resting on a stack of unpaid bills. She gently shook him awake, and he looked at her with bleary eyes. "I'm fine. Just close my eyes for a second." Emily bit her lip, fighting tears. She wanted to scream at him to stop, to take care of himself, but she also knew this was his way of loving her. His silence, his suffering, it was all for her. Graduation day loomed closer. Emily's classmates prepared for parties, trips, and the next chapter of their lives. For her, the excitement was tangled with dread. She feared what her father was sacrificing in the shadows. She began writing letters late at night, scribbling her thoughts in a notebook. Words she couldn't say out loud. Words of gratitude, guilt, and love. She wrote, "Dad, I see what you're doing, even when you think I don't. Every shift, every blister, every missed meal, I see it. And one day, I'll find a way to give it back to you. Those pages would eventually shape the letter she'd hand him on graduation day, the one that would break him in ways both painful and healing. For now, though, the Miller household stood in the storm of conflict, between dreams and reality, between hope and exhaustion. Both father and daughter carried their burdens quietly, each trying to protect the other, not realizing that the weight they carried was the same, love, disguised as sacrifice. The morning of graduation dawned with a golden glow, sunlight spilling across the small Miller home as if the universe itself wanted to mark the occasion. For most families in town, graduation day meant joy, laughter, and celebration. For John Miller, it meant pride, buried under layers of fatigue. He had worked a late shift the night before, cleaning the school building where the ceremony would be held. His body ached, his eyes burned, but when he woke to see Emily's cap and gown hanging neatly on the back of her bedroom door, something inside him steadied. This was the day he had been pushing himself toward for years. Emily stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her cap nervously. She wore her gown over a simple white dress, her hair pinned back. She looked older, more grown-up, and John felt a lump form in his throat. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice husky from lack of sleep. She turned and smiled. "Thanks, Dad. You okay?" John nodded, forcing a grin. "Never better. Today's your day." He hid the ache in his shoulders, the pounding in his chest. He wouldn't let exhaustion overshadow this milestone. At the high school gymnasium, the air buzzed with energy. Families filled the bleachers, waving balloons and flowers. Parents wore crisp clothes and carried expensive cameras. John slipped into the crowd in his delivery uniform, the only clean one he had. He didn't own a suit, and his shoes were scuffed from years of walking. He felt eyes on him, but he kept his gaze fixed on the stage, where Emily would soon walk. Emily scanned the audience nervously until her eyes landed on him. He gave her a thumbs up and mouthed, "I'm proud of you." Her heart lifted instantly. The ceremony began. Names were called one by one, and applause echoed as graduates crossed the stage. Emily sat in her row, fingers clenched around the letter she had folded and refolded countless times over the past week. She had poured her heart into it, everything she couldn't say aloud. She planned to give it to her father the moment the ceremony ended. As her name was called, Emily Miller, John leapt to his feet, clapping harder than anyone. His rough hands stung, but he didn't care. His cheers cut through the gym, and for that moment, Emily felt like she was the only graduate in the room. She crossed the stage, shook hands with the principal, and accepted her diploma. The weight of the paper in her hand felt symbolic, not just of her own effort, but of her father's sacrifices. Every late-night shift, every missed meal, every tired smile, it was all contained in that single sheet. After the ceremony, the gym erupted in chaos. Families hugged, cameras flashed, laughter filled the air. Emily wove her way through the crowd until she found her father waiting awkwardly near the bleachers, his posture stiff, his face shining with pride. Before he could say anything, she threw her arms around him. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. "We did it." He hugged her back tightly, his rough hands trembling. "No, sweetheart. You did it. You earned this." Emily pulled back, eyes glistening. "No, Dad. We earned this together." She reached into her gown pocket and pulled out the letter. The paper was creased, smudged with fingerprints, but the words inside were clear. Handing it to him, she said softly, "I wrote this for you. Please read it." John blinked, confused. "What is it?" "Just something I needed to say." The noise of the gym swirled around them, families laughing, balloons bouncing, graduates posing for photos. But for John, the world narrowed to that folded piece of paper in his hands. His calloused fingers trembled as he opened it. Emily stood silently, watching him. She bit her lip, her heart pounding. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when her words would finally speak what her voice couldn't. John's eyes scanned the first lines. His vision blurred instantly, not from exhaustion, but from tears he hadn't expected. "Dad, I know you think I don't see everything you've done for me. But I do. I see every late-night shift, every tired morning, every moment you chose my future over your rest. I see your hands, worn and blistered, still clapping the loudest for me. I see your shoes, worn thin from walking miles so I could ride in comfort. I see you pretending you're fine, when I know you're breaking inside. I see all of it, Dad. And I need you to know, I will never forget." John's chest tightened. His lips trembled as he continued reading. "I don't care about money or fancy things. I care about you. You are my hero, my example, my reason to keep going. When I walk across that stage, it isn't just my diploma, it's yours too. Because everything I am today, I owe to you." The word struck him deeper than anything else ever had. His shoulders shook, and tears streamed down his face in front of everyone. He didn't care who saw. Emily reached out and took his hand, steadying him. Around them, people noticed, whispers stirred, heads turned, but neither of them paid attention. This was their moment. John's voice cracked as he whispered, "Emily. I don't deserve this. I failed so many times. I couldn't give you the life you should have had." Emily shook her head fiercely, tears of her own rolling down her cheeks. "No, Dad. You gave me everything that mattered. You gave me love, sacrifice, and strength. That's more than enough." They stood there, father and daughter, locked in an embrace that spoke louder than any speech, louder than any applause. Around them, the chaos of graduation continued, but to them, the world had gone still. For years, John had carried the belief that he wasn't enough, that his sacrifices were invisible, his worth measured only by the money he couldn't provide. But in that moment, holding his daughter's letter, he realized he had given her something greater than wealth, the foundation of her character. As they walked out of the gym together, Emily leaned her head on his shoulder. John clutched the letter close to his chest like a lifeline. For the first time in years, his steps felt lighter. The future was still uncertain. Bills still waited. Work would still come. But something had shifted between them. The truth was out in the open, and love had taken its rightful place above sacrifice. Graduation day wasn't just about Emily stepping into her future, it was about John finally seeing his own worth reflected in his daughter's eyes. And though neither said it aloud, both knew this day would remain etched in their hearts forever. The days following graduation carried a new kind of energy in the Miller household. For so long, life had been a cycle of exhaustion, bills, and survival. But now, with Emily's diploma framed and resting proudly on the living room wall, there was a spark in the air, a shift that was subtle but undeniable. John still woke before dawn, his alarm clock slicing through the quiet at 4:30 a.m. He still put on his faded delivery uniform and worked his double shifts. But the weight he carried felt different now. He wasn't just trudging through life, he was walking with purpose, with the letter his daughter had given him folded carefully in his wallet. Every break, he would take it out and read a few lines, the words steadying him when fatigue threatened to overwhelm. He had lived so many years believing his sacrifices went unseen, unnoticed. But now he knew, Emily had seen everything. And that truth gave him strength he didn't know he had left. Emily, meanwhile, had entered a new chapter of her own. Graduation had given her courage, but the real test came in the days after. She spent hours filling out scholarship applications, working part-time at the library, and preparing for college. Each time she sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and forms, she thought about the letter. It wasn't just for her father, it was a promise to herself to honor his sacrifices by building a better future. Neighbors in the small town began to notice the change in the Millers. They saw John smiling more, even laughing on occasion. At church on Sunday, when the pastor congratulated Emily in front of the congregation, John stood taller, his chest swelling with pride. Still, not everything was easy. Bills continued to pile up. The rent notice on the fridge was a constant reminder of how fragile their stability was. Some nights, John collapsed into bed so exhausted he barely remembered locking the door. But now, when Emily quietly tucked a blanket around him, she did so with gratitude, not guilt. One evening, a week after graduation, Emily sat across from her father at the dinner table. The meal was simple, spaghetti with Jared sauce, but it felt like a feast compared to the hurried snacks they often ate. "Dad," she began, twirling her fork nervously, "I've been thinking. I know you want me to focus on college, but I want to help more. Maybe I can take on extra shifts this summer. You shouldn't have to carry this all alone anymore." John set his fork down, his tired eyes meeting hers. "Sweetheart, I appreciate that. I really do. But I don't want you worrying about bills. That's my job." "But Dad," he raised his hand gently. "Listen. All these years, I worked myself to the bone because I wanted you to have choices. Not just survival, but real choices. If you start carrying this weight now, then what was it all for?" Emily's throat tightened. She reached across the table, placing her hand on his rough, calloused one. "Then at least promise me this, let me stand beside you. Not behind you, not hidden. Beside you." For a long moment, John didn't answer. Then, with a small smile, he nodded. "Deal." That summer became a turning point. Emily helped where she could, picking up a few babysitting jobs and tutoring younger kids in math. She also threw herself into preparing for college, determined to secure scholarships that would ease her father's burden. John, inspired by his daughter's determination, began to make small changes too. For the first time, he asked his supervisor about opportunities for advancement. He started keeping a notebook of expenses, something he had always brushed aside before. It wasn't easy, old habits of scraping by didn't vanish overnight, but there was hope where once there had only been struggle. One Saturday afternoon, John and Emily took a walk through the park downtown. Families were grilling, kids rode bikes, and music drifted from a nearby festival. Emily clutched a college acceptance letter in her hand, the paper warm from being read and reread. "Dad," she said, her voice light with excitement, "I got the scholarship. Full tuition." John stopped in his tracks, staring at her as if he hadn't heard correctly. "What?" She held up the letter, laughing through tears. "I got it. It covers everything, tuition, books, housing. I won't have to take loans, Dad. You won't have to worry." For the first time in years, John felt the crushing weight on his chest lift. He pulled her into a hug so tight she could hardly breathe. Tears streamed down his face, but they were tears of relief, not exhaustion. "Emily, you did it. You really did it." "No, Dad," she whispered into his shoulder. "We did it. Always together." As they walked home that evening, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. John looked at his daughter, her eyes glowing with hope, and realized something profound. For so long, he had believed his worth was measured in money, in what he couldn't give. But now, seeing Emily's future unfold, he understood, his worth was in the love he gave, the sacrifices he made, and the strength he had passed down to her. The aftermath of graduation wasn't just about diplomas or scholarships. It was about healing, about recognizing that their story wasn't one of struggle alone, but of triumph born from love. It was the beginning of something new, a future not defined by hardship, but by resilience and possibility. And as John slipped the letter back into his wallet that night, he knew it would never leave his side. It wasn't just a letter anymore. It was a lifeline, a reminder, and a legacy. The summer sun poured through the Miller household windows, bright and relentless, but inside the house, tension had quietly begun to mount again. Even with scholarship secured and a glimmer of financial relief, John's body was still fragile from years of overwork. The 3 jobs he had held for so long had left their mark: aches in his joints, constant fatigue, and a heart that occasionally skipped under stress. Emily noticed the signs almost immediately. One evening, she found her father slumped in his recliner, the TV flickering in the background. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for a glass of water. "Dad, you okay?" she asked softly. John gave a strained smile. "Just tired, Em. That's all." But Emily didn't believe him. She remembered the nights when he had returned from his diner shift and then headed straight to janitorial work, barely eating, barely sleeping. She had watched him push through the pain, refusing rest, refusing help, all for her. The breaking point came one afternoon in early August. John was delivering groceries on a sweltering day, the sun beating down on him as he climbed stairs with heavy bags. Halfway up, he felt a sudden sharp pain in his chest. His legs buckled, and he collapsed onto the concrete porch. A neighbor rushed out to help. "John. Are you okay?" John waved him off weakly. "I'm fine, just need a second." Inside, Emily had been waiting for him to return. She had been sorting through college forms, her mind focused on summer classes. When he didn't come home for longer than usual, worry gnawed at her. She grabbed her keys and ran to the street, her heart pounding. She found him slumped against the porch railing, sweat pouring from his brow. Panic surged through her. "Dad! Oh my God, Dad!" John tried to stand, but his knees gave way. He looked at her, fear flickering in his tired eyes. "Emily, don't worry," but she couldn't. She called 911 immediately. The paramedics arrived within minutes, checking his vitals and stabilizing him. In the ambulance, Emily held his hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, please, please don't leave me. I need you." John's lips quivered. For the first time in years, he let himself admit vulnerability. I'm scared too, Em. I'm so tired." The ride to the hospital was filled with silence, except for the soft beeping of the ambulance monitor. Emily whispered to herself, "I have to save him the way he saved me for so long." At the hospital, doctors moved quickly. Tests revealed that John was suffering from severe exhaustion and early signs of heart strain. He would need rest, therapy, and a drastic reduction in his workload. The reality hit hard. Years of relentless labor had brought him to the brink. Emily stayed by his side the entire night. She held his hand, reading aloud from her favorite book, sharing stories from her school, anything to keep his mind at ease. John, for the first time, allowed himself to lean on her. The roles had shifted. The protector now needed protection. That night, John finally spoke openly. "Emily. I always thought I had to carry everything. Money, work, bills. I thought if I faltered, I would fail you. But maybe I was wrong." Emily squeezed his hand. "Dad, you've never failed me. Not once. You've given me everything I could ever need. But now it's your turn to let me take care of you." For the first time in years, John cried openly, tears of pain, relief, and realization mixing together. Emily brushed his hair back from his face and whispered, "We'll get through this together." The next few days were a turning point. John rested, gradually reconnecting with the idea that strength was not measured by endless labor, but by love and balance. Emily helped with meals, light housework, and managing appointments. She became his anchor, the same way he had been hers for so long. One evening, sitting together on the porch, Emily spoke softly. "Dad, remember that letter I gave you at graduation?" John nodded, smiling faintly. "How could I forget? It broke me, but in a good way." "It did, Dad." "And I wrote another one," she said, pulling a new sheet from her notebook. "This time, it's not about me. It's about us, about everything we've survived together and everything we'll face from here on. John took the letter, reading aloud as Emily watched. Her words were simple, heartfelt, gratitude, love, and a promise that they would face the future together, hand in hand. By the end, both of them were laughing through tears, the tension and fear of the past years melting away. That evening, they sat quietly on the porch, watching the sun set over the town. John reached out and held Emily's hand. "I finally understand," he said. "You've always been my greatest strength. Not money, not work, you." Emily rested her head on his shoulder. "And you've always been mine, Dad. We're stronger together." The breaking point had come, and with it, the healing began. The weight of years of sacrifice had finally been acknowledged, shared, and transformed into something stronger: trust, love, and a new beginning. From that day forward, John limited his work hours, focusing on health and meaningful time with Emily. Emily flourished in college, supported by scholarships and her father's love, and John realized that his legacy wasn't the jobs he'd held, it was the resilient, compassionate daughter he had raised. Through the hardship and near collapse, the Millers discovered a profound truth: love, when openly shared and nurtured, could heal wounds no amount of money or effort alone could fix. The crisp autumn air settled over the small town as John and Emily stepped out of the hospital for the last time. The sun painted golden hues over the streets, a soft reminder that life moved forward, always offering light after darkness. For the Millers, life had changed, not in sudden, miraculous leaps, but in steady, meaningful steps. John had returned to work, but differently this time. No longer 3 jobs, no longer sacrificing health and time. He worked at the diner he loved, but with shorter shifts and more breaks. He took walks in the evenings, tended the small garden behind their house, and even picked up the hobby he had abandoned decades ago: woodworking. Slowly, John learned that strength wasn't measured by how much you could carry alone, it was measured by the love you shared and the care you gave both to yourself and to those you loved. Emily flourished in college. The scholarship covered her tuition and housing, and she balanced part-time tutoring and community projects to ease her father's remaining financial load. She excelled academically, but she also carried a new understanding: success wasn't just about awards or accolades, it was about recognizing the sacrifices that paved the way, and honoring them through gratitude and action. One chilly Saturday morning, Emily invited her father to a small college event. Students were presenting projects, and Emily had created a community service initiative to tutor underprivileged kids. As she spoke to a group of local children, John watched silently, pride swelling in his chest. His daughter wasn't just achieving academically, she was embodying the values he had tried to instill through years of hard work, patience, and unconditional love. Later that day, over hot chocolate in a cozy cafe, Emily handed John another letter. "Dad," she began, "I want you to know that everything you did for me, every shift, every sacrifice, it didn't go unnoticed. And now, it's my turn to give back. You've shown me what it means to love without conditions. That's the legacy I want to carry forward." John read the letter slowly, savoring each word. Tears filled his eyes, not of pain this time, but of understanding and joy. He took Emily's hand across the table. "You've already given me more than I could ever ask for. Your love, your respect, your strength, that's all I ever wanted." Over the coming months, the Miller home was filled with laughter, conversation, and shared experiences. John took part in Emily's college projects, offering wisdom and encouragement. Emily, in turn, ensured her father's life was lighter, more balanced, and full of moments of rest and happiness. They had moved beyond survival into thriving together. The town took notice. Neighbors commented on the change in John, how he walked with a spring in his step, how he laughed easily at the diner, how his home radiated warmth. Emily's story became quietly inspiring among classmates and community members. It was a testament not to wealth or status, but to the enduring power of sacrifice, love, and resilience. One evening, as the first snow fell softly over the streets, John and Emily sat by the fireplace, sipping tea. John held the first letter Emily had written, the one from graduation day, and placed it next to the scholarship letter on the mantel. "Do you ever think back to those days?" Emily asked. John nodded. "Every day. I remember the exhaustion, the worry, and the fear I wasn't enough. But I also remember you, your determination, your love. And now I know that was enough. You made it all worthwhile." Emily leaned her head on his shoulder. "And you made me who I am. Everything I achieve is because of you." John smiled, a deep, contented smile. "We did this together, Emily. And that's the greatest lesson of all." The moral of their story became clear, both to them and to anyone who witnessed it. True wealth isn't counted in money, jobs, or possessions, it's measured in love, sacrifice, and the bonds we build with those we care about. Kindness, patience, and resilience leave a legacy far more lasting than any paycheck ever could. As the night grew colder outside, the Millers felt warmth inside, not just from the fire, but from understanding, forgiveness, and mutual respect. They had endured hardship, faced fear, and experienced the breaking point. And yet, through it all, they had grown stronger, closer, and more grateful. Emily's future stretched out before her, bright with opportunity. John's life, though simpler, was richer than ever, filled with love, pride, and the knowledge that his sacrifices had created a foundation that would last for generations. And as the snow continued to fall softly outside, father and daughter sat together in quiet triumph, understanding that the greatest lessons in life are not taught in schools or written in books, but lived every day through sacrifice, love, and unwavering hope. In the end, it was not the struggle that defined them, it was how they faced it, together. Years had passed since Emily's graduation day, but the memory of that moment remained vivid in both her and John's hearts. Life had settled into a rhythm neither of them could have imagined during those long, exhausting years. Yet the lessons learned, sacrifices made, and love shared had left an indelible mark on their lives. Emily had graduated college with honors. She pursued a career in education, dedicating herself to tutoring and mentoring students from underprivileged communities. Each classroom she entered reminded her of her father's sacrifices, the long nights he had spent working, the quiet determination he carried to give her every opportunity. She often shared stories of resilience and love with her students, emphasizing the value of family, gratitude, and perseverance. John, now older and wiser, had scaled back his work to focus on health, hobbies, and community involvement. He volunteered at the local community center, mentoring young fathers who, like him, juggled multiple jobs while trying to provide for their children. His experiences had made him patient, compassionate, and deeply respected in the neighborhood. People often sought his advice, unaware of the long nights and heavy burdens that had shaped the quiet, steady man they now admired. The Millers' home was warm and inviting, filled with laughter, books, and the faint aroma of home-cooked meals. Photographs of milestones, certificates, and the framed letters Emily had given her father adorned the walls, a tangible timeline of love, sacrifice, and triumph. One afternoon, Emily returned home for a visit. She found her father in his workshop, carving a wooden bench for the small park nearby. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. She smiled at the sight of him, hands roughened by work but steady, eyes bright with purpose. "Hey, Dad," she called softly. John looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Hey, Em. How was the city today?" Emily sat beside him, watching the careful movements of his hands as they shaped the wood. "Busy, as always. But I stopped thinking about work for a moment and realized something." John tilted his head, curious. "Everything you did for me, it's still inspiring me every day. Not just now, but forever. Your sacrifices, they've shaped me into the person I am, and I carry that with me wherever I go." John's chest swelled with quiet pride. "I never did it for recognition, Emily. I did it because I love you. That's all a father can do. Emily took his hand in hers. And that love, it's a legacy. One that I will pass on, one that my students will see, one that my children will feel someday. John smiled, a mixture of humility and gratitude washing over him. I like that. Legacy. Sounds good. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, laughing, and reminiscing about the years that had tested them both. From the endless shifts and financial struggles to the small victories and moments of quiet pride, each memory was a thread in the rich tapestry of their shared journey. In the evening, as the sun set, Emily handed her father a small, wrapped box. What's this? John asked, curiosity piqued. Open it, she replied with a grin. Inside was a small, handcrafted journal. The cover read, "For Dad, stories of strength, love, and lessons learned." I want you to write down everything, Emily said. Every lesson you've taught me, every memory, every piece of wisdom. One day, this will help someone else, just like your sacrifices helped me. John ran his fingers over the leather cover, touched by her thoughtfulness. I never thought of it that way, but I will. I promise. That night, the Millers sat together, father and daughter, writing down memories, reflections, and lessons. They laughed at the small mishaps and missteps of the past, cried softly at the hardships endured, and marveled at the strength that had carried them through. Outside, the neighborhood lights twinkled like stars. Inside, the warmth of love, resilience, and hope wrapped around them, stronger than ever. The story of John and Emily Miller was no longer just about struggle or sacrifice, it was about the enduring power of love and the importance of leaving a meaningful legacy. A father's relentless devotion had shaped a daughter's future, and in turn, the daughter's recognition and care had healed the father's spirit. It was a story that would live on in whispers, in smiles, in letters and journals, and in the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. A story of courage, of love tested and proven, and of the quiet strength that defines true family bonds. And as Emily left that night, she hugged her father tightly, whispering, "Thank you, Dad. For everything. I'll carry this with me always." John held her close, his heart full. "And I'll be with you, always. Remember that." The snow fell gently outside, coating the small town in quiet serenity. Inside, father and daughter sat together, reflecting on the journey they had endured. The hardships, the tears, the victories, they had built a legacy far richer than wealth, far deeper than material success. They had built a legacy of love. And in that simple, profound truth, the Millers found peace, purpose, and the unbreakable bond that would guide them through all the years to come.